Chapter 25. The Master Purveyor stepped from the clean, hard grating of the shuttlecraft's gangplank onto the crunchy dirt and rocks of the path that ran down the middle of Childers Commons. He looked down and saw golden wisps of dust settling onto the seams of his boots where the uppers were stitched into the soles, and along the edges of the soles themselves. The powdery brown and gold particles dulled the polished shine. Were he a less controlled being, he would have stopped and cleaned them after every step he took on this pathetic planet. It wasn't how he had imagined it. His senses were assaulted as a slight breeze wafted into his nostrils, and he could smell the various scents of cut grass, wet dirt, trees, and animals, and people. Mostly people, in fact. He took a scented tissue from his front uniform pocket and held it up to his nose. He was instantly glad that he had, given that the line of separatists on their knees the advanced troops had gathered along the path stretched quite a ways. He would have to walk past each of them to get where he wanted to go. He noticed that the majority of them were young children. "Slink," he called out. His aide was at his side in a blink. The Master Purveyor instantly noticed the slight man was without his usual tethered companion. He was nervous, jumpy. "Yes, master." "This is all of the village?" "This is the compound." He was flitting his eyes back and forth as they walked. "The villagers are outside, keeping their distance." The Purveyor nodded. "Round them up too, in case I need to question them as well." "Of course. Shall I have them brought up to the ship, or remain here?" "Here for now. No need to soil the air of the ship any earlier than necessary." "Yes, master." Slink quietly murmured commands to his group of advanced troops as they walked together. The two reached the front stoop of a medium-sized building at one end of the commons. The Purveyor looked up toward a small round window at the very top front of the facade. "Up there, you say?" the Purveyor asked. "The signal was traced precisely to that room." "Then let's see what's up there, shall we?" The two made their way inside, and the Purveyor was pleased to see that Slink had positioned each dorm entranceway with a guard, just like he had set up a guard every few paces behind the natives lined up along the path outside. An overwhelming show of force was always important. They had climbed several flights of stairs before Slink led them inside a room on the top floor. They paused and looked around. There was nothing to see. The Purveyor turned to Slink. Suddenly remembering, Slink muttered an apology, and he reached up to pull on a rope hanging from the ceiling. With the tug, a ladder descended from above, touching down on the floor right by the Purveyor's feet. He nodded and descended to the attic above. Slink went right up behind him, taking special care not to follow too closely. The first thing the Master Purveyor noticed was the circular window on the far wall set above a tousled bed. The next thing he noticed was that almost every square inch of the room was covered in drawings, schematics, models, mobiles, and the like. All were handcrafted. He took one drawing off the wall of a particularly complicated-looking piece of machinery that was built into a rock. His eyes narrowed. He then looked around further and spotted a plate with moldy food on it sitting on top of a pile of dirty clothes. "The transmission came to this room?" he asked Slink again. "Yes, master." "And you found no one occupying this room when we arrived?" "No, master." The Purveyor nodded. "Bring me the mistress," he said. Slink nodded, and moments later he was hauling a salt and pepper-haired woman up the narrow ladder into the attic room. The Purveyor kept his back to her when addressing her. "Mistress," he said, "whose room is this?" "I demand that you let our children go," she said, chin up. "You, for once, Mistress Frizz, are in a position to demand nothing," the Purveyor said to her. "Even if those words have never really been mine to say, it still feels sweet to say them." Frizz frowned. "Do I know you?" she asked. "Who are you?" The Master Purveyor turned to face her. "I am the Master Purveyor of the Authority, on interstellar space travel, he said, stepping toward her. And you do not know me, but I know you. She narrowed her old eyes, looking him up and down, with a sour purse to her lips. Were you a child here? She asked skeptically. We have so many come through these halls. The Master Purveyor smiled a cruel smile. Friz stepped forward, and her eyes widened. You? She said. It can't be. She narrowed her eyes again and looked even closer. I'm afraid you've mistaken me for someone else, he said. The Purveyor's smile dropped, and he gestured to the slovenly appearance of the room, particularly the moldy plate of food. It looks to me like someone left here in quite a hurry, he observed. Several days ago, in fact. Is that right? Frizz's eyes hadn't left the man's face. You are not how I remember you. Where did they go? He asked, ignoring her. Did they go out to the old lab, perhaps? Friz stood as solidly as a wall. The Purveyor looked at her, and she spat on him. You defile us all by coming here with your wickedness, she said. I will not help a sinner. The Purveyor calmly wiped off the spittle from his forehead and took a sniff from his handkerchief. I see you separatists still have all the vigor and vitriol behind your backward and ignorant religious spoutings. He gestured again to the room around them, this time to the various drawings of technological contraptions that hung about the walls. I wonder, do you have as much disdain for the boy's defilings that he pegs to the sacred technology-free wood planks around us? You will never find him, Friz said, and was about to spit at him again when Slink stepped in to intervene. She struggled against his wiry grasp for a moment, then stopped as the Purveyor took a couple steps forward to look right into her face. He pocketed his handkerchief and smiled again. You are going to answer my questions one way or another, he said to her. She stood silently defiant in front of him. He stepped back, out of spitting range, and gestured to Slink. Indakarans are hard workers. Bring them up to the ship for processing. Yes, Master. Oh, and about the children, Master. I was hoping I could select several of them for my companion project. I suppose that's fine. How many would you like taken up to the ship then, Master? He locked eyes with Friz. I want all of them. Chapter 26. Haber, of course, complained the entire 30 minutes he spent banging around in the mess hall kitchen. Mess would appear to be the operative word in that sentence. It was dusty and cobwebby and smelled like it hadn't been used in at least a couple of years. Balta confirmed as much. But there were preserved food stores, and since everyone had raised their hands for the Who is Hungry poll, Balta had led them there rather than her quarters. To Petrick, it seemed as though the Red Robert was a relic of a grander time long gone into the past. The fact that there was a mess hall indicated that more people were meant to be manning this ship, as opposed to just Colossus and Balta. The mess hall hadn't been touched except for junk storage in at least a couple of years, which likewise indicated that the Red Robert had missed its merry crew for quite some time. Balta wore her ship as she did her ill-fitting clothes. It was too big for just her. It was an empty house with all the children gone, neglected and falling apart, with only time to keep it company. Petra gave a sidelong glance at Balta, who was sniffing her food skeptically. She reached down with her utensil and slid a munchin strip into her mouth. She chewed carefully for a moment, and then swallowed. Well? Haber asked. He was standing on the other side of the table from the captain, and his hands were on his hips with an expectant scowl. This doesn't taste like the strips in the program database, she said slowly. Program database? Haber scoffed. You think I'm going to work with that drivel? I cook with my recipes, Captain. You'll never convince me to do otherwise. Balta took another bite and nodded her head. She reached into her coat and produced a small silver flask, uncorked it with a practiced ease, and poured a clear brown liquid into her steaming cup of brew. She then recorked the flask and replaced it in her coat and sipped her spiked drink. "They'll do," she said. Petrick got the distinct impression that was as close to "it's delicious" as Haber was ever going to get from the surly captain. Now that their host had eaten, they all dug into their food. Petrick took an opportunity between giant mouthfuls to toss a piece of meat to a patiently waiting Clark down by his dangling feet. "It's so good," Barry called out. "You're the best cook, Haber." "I'm glad you approve, Master Barry," he replied matter-of-factly. From the other end of the table, both Dedrin and Eris quietly each told Haber the food was delicious. The smiles on their faces said to Petrick that they meant it, too. Haber sat next to the children and watched as Balta devoured her meal, grunting now and then. Taking the noises to mean the pirate's captain mood was, perhaps, improved, Haber addressed her. "Captain, if I may inquire, what is the current state of space travel in this region, and beyond, in the Outer Rim?" Balta looked at him like he was crazy. "I couldn't help but notice Aaron's landing looked quite abandoned," Haber said. "Everything has been," Balta said with a wave of her fork. "Where have you been?" "He was asleep until we found him in my father's laboratory," Petrick offered. "Deactivated," Haber said, correcting him, "but mostly factual. I'm afraid I'm quite underinformed." Balta grunted and turned back to her food. "The Authority banned travel 10 years ago when the new Master Purveyor took power. There's no space travel here anymore." "You're a space traveler," said Susie. "No man stands between me and my stars," she said, and then added with a smirk, "I'm sneaky." Petrick flipped Clark another piece of strip, and a thought then occurred to him. "Haber," he asked, "so you don't need to eat, right?" Haber frowned. I am an android," he said, as if the answer were as plain as the nose on his face. "I have a self-sustaining power core built into the center of my chest." Petrick nodded. "Does Clark have one of those?" he asked. "He does," answered Haber. Petrick tossed Clark a veggie slice. The dog munched on it happily. "Well, then why does he eat food?" "Ah," Haber replied, understanding where Petrick was going with his line of inquiry. "Clark is a unique android in that he was designed from head to tail to look and behave and feel precisely like a real Zunian temple dog, a breed commonly found across known civilization." "That dog is an android?" Balta asked. Her utensil paused halfway up into her mouth. She squinted her eyes in her usual manner and looked the dog up and down in disbelief. Barry piped up. "He is. We saw his blinky insides and everything when we got the message out of him." "Why was he made so lifelike?" Petrick asked. "Why did you make him like that?" "I would think the answer to that would be obvious," Haber responded. "Imagine if Mistress Frizz had seen Clark's blinky insides." "They'd have taken Clark away in a microsecond," Petrick realized. "And you'd have been left without your guardian. That's why your father designed him so uniquely." "So he doesn't need food, then?" Susie asked. "Would he starve to death?" Haber asked rhetorically before answering. "No, but Clark is programmed to eat food just like any dog. He desires it like any normal dog, and he will go after it and beg for it like any normal dog." "Tell me about it," Barry said. "Remember the time he ate our lunches on the hike up to Summit Top?" Susie and Barry chuckled at the memory. "You're saying your father built that android dog?" Balta asked. Haber and the children turned to look at her, not realizing that she'd stopped eating. "Yes," Petrick answered, "and Haber, too." "I've traveled 100,000 light-years across this galaxy," Balta continued, looking at Clark, "and I've never seen anything like that. Who's your father?" "His name is Fenton, and he's the greatest man I've ever known," Petrick answered. "He left right after I was born and my mom died to go find the source of the Starstuff." "You know," said Barry, "to save the galaxy and whatnot." "That's right," Petrick said. "But something went wrong, so he sent a distress call, and we're going to find him and help him." Balta stood abruptly. "Your father is Fenton the Seeker?" The question was an accusation. Petrick stumbled uncertainly. "Fenton," Balta said, challenging him further. From the fringe worlds, seeker of the source. Yeah, that sounds like my father, but I've never heard him called that. He sent Petrick a message for help, Barry interjected. Like Petrick said. Haber shot Barry a shut-up look, and the pudgy boy clamped his mouth. Balta stood in front of Petrick, face reddening and looking dangerous. She raised a fist and extended a finger toward the boy. It was quivering. I should have thrown you out that airlock, she said. Captain! Haber reached out for Balta's shaking arm, but Balta slapped him away. You stay away from me, you hear? It was not a request. And the first microsecond I get to put you off my ship, I'm leaving you weeping pups behind. You got it? Yes, Petrick said, his voice beginning to quiver. Don't talk to me, I said, Balta yelled at him. Petrick just nodded this time. Balta grabbed her partially eaten plate with a grimy paw and headed out of the mess hall. And clean this place up when you finish, she called behind her. There was a stunned silence in the mess hall after she left. Susie, Barry, and Petrick all exchanged confused glances with each other, then looked at Haber for an explanation. He appeared to be deep in thought. Even Dedrin and Eris seemed taken aback by the captain's sudden outburst. Susie narrowed her eyes at the door where she had left so abruptly. Well, that was very rude, she said. We'll just have to try and stay out of her way, Petrick said, attempting to calm himself. It would seem, Haber chimed in, as though your father may be more well known than perhaps we thought. That could be a good thing, Barry said hopefully. Maybe it will make him easier to track. Perhaps, Haber said. Or perhaps Captain Squints is just another bully, Susie said. She was red-faced and staring at the door she'd left through. Captain Balta is certainly gruff, said Eris from off to the side, and I don't know what that was about, but she is the only one who came to our village offering to take whoever could pay their way to escape the mining draft. Mining draft? Haber asked, full attention now on the couple. Yes, Dedrin answered. You have not heard of it. Haber and the children shook their heads. Then you are lucky, Eris said, so far, but the authority will come for your village eventually, as they did for ours. They instituted a sector-wide mining draft for the fringe worlds to work on the last remaining wandering giants in the Outer Rim, Dedrin elaborated. It's why we're fleeing to a planet in the Outer Rim, like hundreds of thousands of others trying to build a new home, away from the authority. Wandering giants? Susie asked. Petrick spoke up. It's what they call the mines. They're whole planets without a star, rich in starstuff ore. My dad's told me about them. Why wandering giants? Barry asked, absently chewing another strip. We don't know where they came from, Haber answered, and everyone turned toward him. They have no star to tether them into an orbit, and so they wander through empty space. They're hard to find, hard to track, and where they come from is richer in star stuff than the rest of the galaxy by a factor of 1,000,000. The source. But wait, said Petrick, what's so bad about the mines? Dedrin shuddered at the question. They are brutal, Haber continued. I've never set foot on one of the wandering giants, but the mining machinery is exceptionally large and fast. It takes thousands to operate one rig, and they run around the clock. Remember, these are planets with no star to light them and to keep them warm. There is no sunrise in a starstuff mine, no spring or summer, only night. Haber looked over at the doorway where the pirate captain had strode out. Eyesight is the first thing to go. My father didn't tell me that part, Petrick said. Haber turned back to the couple. But surely the miners are retiring long before that happens, he said. There was pay for their retirement and their families. That was the incentive to work the mines. Not since the draft, Dedrin shook his head. There is no pay, no retirement, no incentive. Those who can no longer work disappear, Balta has told us. How is this possible? Haber said. We are the fringe worlds, Dedrin answered with a shrug. There is no one to miss us. This is why we flee, Eris said. We hope to start a new life, free. The Authority now has exclusive control over the remaining Starstuff stores, Dedrin said, except for a shrinking group of pirates and smugglers, like Captain Balta. They run Liberatia, which is a haven to those fleeing conscription located in an isolated section of the wall, and they have a traveling lane that's mapped out from there to the Outer Rim. Liberatia, Haber repeated in surprise. The smugglers' colony? Dedrin nodded his head. We're catching a colony ship from there. The Outer Rim is supposed to be wide and far enough to make us impossible to find. Things have progressed far worse than I ever could have imagined. Haber shook his head, trying to process what he was hearing. I can't believe that families would be using Liberatia as a means to get to the Outer Rim. That must mean the Authority has blocked off the central gateway. The gate has been closed for 10 years, Eris said, since private travel was outlawed. How do you know all this? Haber asked. We would not leave our home, break our customs, without being informed, Eris said. This was the only way. You have truly been ignorant, then, of the goings-on, Dedrin asked him. He was asleep till we found him, Barry said, and we didn't know anything until we found Petrick's father's laboratory. I did not know that Fenton the Seeker was from Indikar, Eris said. Was your village a safe haven for the practice of the technological? Oh, no, Petrick answered. I couldn't build so much as a circuit board without being in danger of expulsion. Our village was of Mother Indikar. Ours as well, Dedrin nodded. We would play in secret, Barry said, chiming in again. And his father's workshop was out in the woods, away from Childers. You three are all parentless, Eris asked. That's right, Susie said. What's wrong with that? Nothing, of course, Eris said. We had a house for the parentless in our village as well. Dedrin and I, we are childless. The couple hung their heads, shame descending upon the room. The children took it in. They'd never seen shame from this side, only from theirs, desiring to be chosen, taken home, to see the shame from the childless, those who did the choosing. It was surprising. Family is life, Petrick said to them, the customary Indikar in conclusion to any thought on children. Family is life, Dedrin echoed back. Well, I'm sure glad you decided to hire this ship, Barry piped into the conversation. Otherwise, we would never have been able to leave the planet either. You guys can start over in your new world, and we can save the galaxy. It was a fortunate circumstance, Haber agreed. We are pleased that our good fortune has become your good fortune, Eris said, smiling. We've heard of others on Indikar, from other villagers, who are likewise fleeing, Dedrin said. You may have found another ship to stow away on. Possibly, said Haber, but unlikely. We are in your and Captain Balta's debt. There was another awkward silence after that. Petrick looked carefully and slowly at the couple. They were tired, worn, beaten down. Petrick turned his gaze to his group of motley travelers and realized that they struck him the same. Even Balta, with her blustering demeanor and her shiny tower of a robot friend, even she had seemed low to the ground, lonely. The mess hall was the perfect place to be feeling such a way, with its piles of broken machinery and junk collecting dust and abandoned spiderwebs. The entire galaxy seemed deserted to Petrick, and everything he was hearing seemed to back that generalization up. This mess hall designed for dozens of rowdy crew members, this ship with its winding corridors and closed doors, Aaron's Landing with its slouching roof, his father's lab with its dusty rows of forgotten gadgets, his friends with their tired eyes so far from home. We should retire to our quarters, Eris said, breaking the silence. Dedrin nodded in agreement, and they stood. Dedrin offered his hand in appreciation to Haber. The meal was excellent, Mr. Android, he said. You can call me Habersham, he answered, in as pleasant a tone as the dour machine could have possibly imagined. Dedrin and Eris then both shuffled out of the mess hall, leaving just the children and Haber. I would suggest that we do as the captain has requested, Haber said after a moment, "and clean this room." "Maybe she won't be so upset with us that way," Petrick offered. "Let her be upset," Susie said, sulking at the thought. "She's a mean old windbag anyway." "Yeah," agreed Barry. "Why do we always have to clean?" Petrick shook his head. Mutiny already. "There's no discussion about it," Haber said. "As the de facto adult of the group, I say it's happening." "You're not an adult, though," Barry pointed out. "You're an android." "That's why I added de facto to my statement." "What does de facto—" "Master Barry, I suggest you snap to it unless you want to be eating survival rations from here on out." That got Barry's mouth closed and his body up, and Susie begrudgingly roused behind him. Petrick surveyed the work ahead of them. Mess hall indeed, he thought. And that is the end of chapter 26. Tomorrow, same time, same place, we'll do chapter 27. Thank you so much for joining in. I hope that everything went well with the broadcast. It looks like it did. As always, if there were any issues with the broadcast, just give it a check out over on the YouTubes. I have pasted the link to that. Or if you want to go back and to listen to any previous chapters, because we are definitely in the middle of the story now. And yeah, if you're just tuning in or if you haven't listened for a while, there's stuff you missed. So go back and check it out. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I will catch you tomorrow, same time, same place. And we will see what's going on with what's going on in the village and Childers back on Endicott with the Authority. And we'll find out how things are going on the ship with Captain Balta and our heroes. Till then, bye.